Hello, hello. I have here another 2 LEGO Star Wars action battle sets, and I'm going to review both of them in this one video to save you some time. This one's called Endor Assault, obviously based on Return of the Jedi, and it pits a speeder bike against an Ewok in a tree. It's a bit of a strange pairing for a battle scenario, but let's check it out. The speeder bike is naturally piloted by a scout trooper, and this is the most recent version with the dual molded helmet, which looks very good and is going to have the best consistency of any patterns, any designs that they've made to date due to that dual molding. There's a good level of detail on the printing on the back of the torso. And on the front, the prints go all the way through the hip and into the leg pieces. There's a little bit of fuzziness to that print, but overall this is a pretty good looking figure if you ask me. And of course, the pilot is an angry clone. The Ewok, meanwhile, is an officially licensed Wicket with some pretty good paint applications on a pretty good mold for that head and body piece that overlays the standard sized torso, which has no print on it, and the little short legs down below. You know, just the looking at the tan areas that are placed there for the different colored fur, the edges are pretty nice to be applied to such a three-dimensional surface like that. I think that the hood is a little bit shiny. Would have been better if they had a matte paint for that, or even a satin colored paint. But overall, it's a pretty good looking figure to me, especially for something so small. Its face is very detailed. The speeder bike is a pretty weak design to look at. You know, it's fairly lame if you ask me. I mean, it's so boxy, blocky. The guy just sits there on top of a big old rectangular base. It looks to me like one of those 25-cent rides outside of a supermarket for little kids. You know, you get on and it just rocks back and forth for a little bit and makes a single sound. That's what this looks like to me. It's very disappointing. It just, you know, it gets across the general idea of one of these speeder bikes. Does use some modern pieces and everything, but it's just not good. Now the intention is that you will pair it up with this target, which is built into some terrain. You pair it up by placing it on top, like so. And then you can just imagine that the foliage is foliage that's going by as the speeder bike is speeding around, and you need to try to target it and catch it at just the right spot. But in fact, it's just a static target, and the idea here is that you use one of the old Technic competition cannons included in this set. It's a very simple build here. You basically just angle it, aim it completely manually. You know, they've got a little way to set the elevation to one point, but other than that, I mean, you might as well just hold this thing in your hand. So that's fairly simple. Fortunately, these cannons do work well themselves. That's how that works. It's a satisfying enough little explosion motion, you know, with the bike itself getting knocked off and the rider getting knocked off. But I don't know, there's just something lacking about this to me for the play pattern of trying to take down a speeder bike. I want to see this in motion. For it to just be sitting there like it's stuck in a bush doesn't feel satisfying to me when I'm trying to think about, you know, taking it down, thinking about the perspective of whoever's operating this. I feel like this needed some motion, a pair of wheels underneath and a long handle so it could be pulled along, or better yet, how about a pullback motor in there that you could wind up and then the thing would just slowly move along on its own, you know? I think that really would have made it compelling, but as it is, it might as well just be a stack of 2x4 bricks, in my opinion. Wicket's tree is also static, you know, it just sits there. But at least it makes more sense. You know, it's a tree. It's not supposed to be moving. And this looks pretty decent, you know, with the exception of the big blue target there. The build takes a little bit of time to put together and has a fair number of pieces and different colors and everything. So this works out. He has a spear over there on the side, so, you know, you could put the spear in his hand. But for the most part, this just kind of looks like an outpost or an outlook, like a watchtower. You know, this doesn't look like something that would be attacking. I can't easily imagine a cannon or a source of fire, a source of firepower being associated with this. So it seems like more of just just, from a fantasy perspective, a static target where you're just taking out a single person who just happens to be sitting there innocently. So when I hit this, when I hit this, it just knocks Wicket out, Only takes one try to do it, but again, not particularly compelling. At least, like I said, this makes more sense to me, and kind of wish there were multiple of these in one set, multiple targets like this. Here are the leftover parts from the Endor set build, just mostly regular stuff. Alright, time to see if the smaller of the two Hoth sets of this season is any better than the Endor set. I can tell you just at first glance, it seems like it makes more sense, but let's take a closer look regardless. The figures in this one are a Hoth Rebel Trooper and a Snow Trooper. Perfectly appropriate for the scene, I think. Both of these look good to me. They don't have any extra accessories on the back. The Snow Trooper doesn't have the cloth pieces around the legs and doesn't have the environmental suit actually built up around the back, but I think they're fine figures regardless for what they are. No surprise for the Trooper on the right, his face, but the one on the left, has some facial hair. That's good, and again, appropriate to the scene. The Snow Trooper gets a heavy repeater cannon emplacement, which looks decent and crucially makes sense. He's using this as part of the assault on the base, and this is a perfect analog to this. So if you're playing as this, you can pretend that you are that, you are firing on behalf of that. So that totally makes sense. And when you're getting shot at, it's a similar thing. It just helps you to get into the scenario a little bit better, and he also has a regular little blaster for him to use for his own personal use, which is nice that they included that, so you don't have to hook him up to this target, to have him be viable on the battlefield. If you want to mix things up with another set or some other figures and things, and when this one gets hit, it's interesting. It doesn't always work. It's not a guaranteed success. But when it does work, it works well, it looks right, and it feels right. On the Rebel side, they get the generator, and it's funny to consider that this little generator here has 4 discs, whereas the one in the $250 Ultimate Collector's Series Assault on Hoth set only had 3. Wasn't even complete. So this is better than that one in that way. It actually looks pretty good. It's super miniaturized, but it looks pretty good for what it is. You can just imagine it being off in the distance, off over the horizon. So it makes sense enough. And you get the little dude having a spot where he can rotate around and do some defense. So again, this represents the analog to one of these, makes sense enough. And he also gets his own minifig weapon that he can hold. Gets the long rifle for that. And as for how this one works, this is actually much more sophisticated. Maybe sophistication isn't always a good thing. There we go, finally. So the ideal hit would have the 2 halves of the generator split apart and knock over the cannon all at the same time. So let me see if I can simulate that. Yeah, like that. It's a little bit more dramatic that way. I don't know if I really mind the requirement of multiple hits. It's probably possible to get a perfect hit, but this is built pretty properly here. Everything's nice and free and at the correct locations. So, it is possible that more people than just me will have trouble getting this to do its full explosion, which I think is actually okay, to require multiple hits to fully destroy the generator. But as far as the mechanism, this is actually pretty cool. See, they've got the Technic ball piece in there. It's just pushing these things apart. It's acting as a little wedge. And once this opens up, you see flame inside. Probably would look a little bit better if it didn't open up completely with the flame section of it, or if they had more of the transparent orange and yellow around the base. But yeah, that's how it works. I think this looks pretty good. You can certainly leave off the target if you don't want it, or make it more subtle looking and it'll actually be a decent looking display emplacement. Again, just for a representation of something that's far away. And it has the play feature in it that works okay. Could work a little bit better, depending upon how you look at it. Yeah, this is fine. It's not as good as I would like, but as a standalone thing, not even considering the play feature, it does look good enough that I'll give it more than a pass. Here we get these leftovers, including the useful black bucket handle piece, and with the extra goggles, you can do something like that. The boxes for these two sets are the same size, and the prices are the same, even though the part counts are rather different. In my opinion, everything about this one is worse, and I really just can't recommend it. Even if it was cheaper, I still wouldn't really recommend it. Like if it was $20 US, right now it's $30 US as a recommended price. Even if it was 20, I still wouldn't recommend it. If it was 15, maybe as a starter pack, as inspiration, as something to use to customize. But I mean, even if it was super cheap, even if it was $15, yeah, if it was $15, I guess I could see it as a couple of pretty good figures and a parts pack, you know. But I just don't feel like this is a good set in general. Even as an action battle set, you know, considering what it's supposed to be, considering how it's supposed to work and all, nah, it's just not there. I think most of that comes down to what they did with the speeder bike. It doesn't look cool enough and doesn't work well enough to me for what it's supposed to be. That needed some motion of some sort. Or, I don't know, maybe they could have had a really, really tiny little ATST. It would have made a little bit more sense, because at least those aren't super mobile. This set, on the other hand, works pretty well, works much better. Between the two, works so much better. I did have some issues with multiple hits being required. That can be seen as a bad thing. It can be seen as a good thing, potentially. At least it provides a little bit of redemption to the LEGO Star Wars team on their Hoth generator design. It's a decent looking generator. Take that off or replace it with some white parts, and you know, it's a nice piece of a little diorama setup. Even this looks good, even though it's a little bit off in its overall proportions compared to the real thing. You know, you might want to figure out a way to change up the design to have the tripod legs a bit shorter to be more realistic. But overall, the whole thing makes more sense. It's a better price to part ratio. Just everything about this is better. Still not great to me, but good and purchasable. I would say that the Endor set is something that you just probably shouldn't consider getting unless you feel that you need to or you want to. Of course, you know, this is just one person's opinion. If you like this, if you think it's a plenty good deal, then get it. You know, completely ignore what I say. But you know, I'm gonna let you know what I personally think, and that's just that. I built both of these together in one video, just like I reviewed them together in one video. So if you want to see how they went together, the internal details of their mechanisms and stuff, you can check that out on my build channel. I will put up a link to that in this video right now, and talk to you again very soon.